Welcome to the Healthcare IT Today CIO podcast. I'm John Lind, the founder and chief editor at Healthcare IT Today, and I'm excited to bring you the most practical healthcare CIO insights and perspectives. We know your job is challenging and we want to help you be more successful. And our guest today is Jesse Fasolo. He's Director, Technology, Infrastructure, and Cybersecurity, Information Security Officer at St. Joseph's Health. Welcome, Jesse.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, so I'm excited to dive into security. I think coming out of all the HIMSS and Vive conferences, security was top of mind for everyone. So before we dive into that, though, tell us a little bit about yourself and St. Joseph's Health.
Absolutely. My name is Jesse Fasolo, of course. I've been in technology for approximately 25 years at this point. I've seen it all. I'm not the master of everything, but I have been through all of the infrastructure, the software development, infrastructure, as I said, security and compliance as well. So I've kind of been through it in my current role for St. Joseph's. I serve, it's an undercared, underprivileged hospital system in New Jersey. We have about 1,000 beds, 2 acute care facilities, and roughly about 5,000 employees that we serve.
Awesome. Well, it's amazing. You have a good background and experience. So, you've been through a lot, but what do you say keeps you up at night?
Well, I can say coming into healthcare keeps me up at night. From previous organizations and industries, I came from legal and banking and finance into healthcare.
Okay.
So I did have some of the stressors of compliance and security around banking,
Sure.
and then transitioning into healthcare. It's a whole new world. Everything is patient related. Everything is connected to the care and quality of patient care, and how a patient is treated at your organization. So if there is a cybersecurity issue, it's directly impacting patients. So that's really truly the overall importance of what keeps me up at night is really if something goes wrong, we then, as a direct effect, cannot care for our patients as well as we could. And then on an infrastructure perspective, the world is ever changing. Backup strategies are one of the biggest topics nowadays because of cybersecurity. So being able to restore, recover, if there is ever an instance or issue, and then just the scope of technology nowadays is growing more than it has with cloud, with on-premise, off-premise, SaaS solutions, third-party, fourth-party. How do you get your hands around all of that and ensure it's going to run and operate as needed and meet your SLAs as well as be secure for your organization?
Yeah, I mean, you bring up such an important point about what we're doing in healthcare and the impact of the work we do, which is a reason to be in healthcare that I hear a lot, but it's also a reason to keep you up at night. That's interesting. How different is healthcare from these other industries? I mean, everyone's like, well, finance can do this. Why can't we? Is it that much different, or do you see a lot of commonalities?
Well, on a technology perspective, when you look at and compare finance and banking to a healthcare system, healthcare has an EHR, an EMR system that has all your medical record information. On a banking, they have a centralized system to do all your bank processing, all your customer information, all your loan information. It's similar, and so those most very, very critical systems on both sides run the show, so to speak. The whole organization is operating from those central points. On the technology side, both still have the SaaS offerings or on-premise offerings, still require high loads, high capabilities of storage and CPU and memory. And then on the security side, it's really different regulations. In healthcare, you're really tied to HIPAA and high tech and others. And then in finance, you're really tied to SOX compliance, PCI compliance, and there's overlap, right? And what worked well for me is really understanding compliance from a finance level and then transitioning into healthcare and, kind of saying, oh, this isn't too much different. I did the same type of annual assessments and ongoing compliance assessments, and it kind of transitioned. So I would say anyone out there, banking and finance, those are great. Great as comparatives. They are similar. I think the benefit here is, obviously if there's a downtime or an incident happening with a bank, typically banks are closed at 6 o'clock and they go to a call center.
Yeah, that's
I don't
true.
know any healthcare system that closes at 6 o'clock and goes to a call center. So there's a much higher level of criticality with a healthcare system to deal with.
Yeah. So what have you done to kind of sleep better at night? Are there some technologies that really have helped you, feel more comfort around the risks associated?
Yeah, absolutely. For me personally, I think it's one, building and establishing a framework and a program around cybersecurity in your organization. And then, since I oversee technology infrastructure, is really going through your technology and ensuring that you are up to date. A lot of organizations really try to get the most out of all of their technology and really go too far, where they're losing the ability to upgrade firmwares and
Mhm.
softwares, and they're leaving themselves vulnerable and dependent on these legacy systems. So you really need to invest in technology infrastructure to get to the place where you can support new technology and be in compliant with these changes and vulnerabilities that are found in all systems. And then on the security side, is really establishing and aligning your organization's program with a framework that you can follow. And then you can assess yourself against that framework annually or biannually or quarterly and continuously improve. Some of the areas is really educating your staff, your employees. I think education is paramount nowadays because things are changing. Everyone is busy, and it's prevalent in the environment where healthcare is one of the most sought after by bad actors. So you need your staff to be educated on what to do, what to see, what to look at. And then I think also looking at your partners. Your partners in
Mm.
healthcare is one of the most important things to look at for us at St. Joseph's. It's an eye opener coming here and seeing, wow, we have hundreds and hundreds of partners that we rely on, and then how to go through them methodically and secure them and do risk assessments on them, and then do security checkpoints on them and make sure the contract agreements are sound in your
Yeah.
favor. So all of those areas, I think, are what I try to do to keep myself sleeping at night. But of course, in technology and cybersecurity, I hope everyone leaves the ringer on and they don't just go to sleep, because I don't, and I'm always awake.
Yeah. No, it's a good point though. And I'd heard you talk on another interview about that you were a fan of NIST, which, is an interesting framework, and really detail oriented from my experience. So why do you like the NIST framework?
Overall, there's a ton of benefits for NIST's framework, in order to make sure, one, you're compliant, make sure, two, you have the security controls and competencies in your team, in your department, that ensure you're closing these vulnerabilities and these gaps in security. I think that's paramount. It kind of sets, and I think I've said this in other spaces, it kind of gives you the breadcrumbs. It kind of leads you down the path to ensure that you are succeeding from a security posture. And again, what is success? Compliance, complacency. There's a certain level of being compliant and being achieving in that. And then there's also being beyond that, where that NIST program, if you do assess yourself against it, you can incrementally move your levels much higher past just being compliant, and have automation, have reporting, and have metrics to actually ensure that the things you're saying you do, that you actually do, and measure them with quality, and then try to improve upon them every year. For us at St. Joseph's, it's really it enables a really long-term successful cybersecurity and risk management strategy. Just aligning with it and sticking with it. And of course, things change, right? The cybersecurity NIST CSF cybersecurity framework is evolving each year. Each 2 years, it upgrades, it changes, it adds new components that are relevant to security. It also changes things like password requirements being changed and laxed, because they're finding that if it's too strong and people are obviously writing down their passwords and doing other things. So it's a good process to have in a department, and obviously it's almost required at this point.
Yeah, well, I think what's interesting is NIST is really complicated. There's a lot of levels. I think there's like maturity levels that you go through, I think, with NIST. and tracking that is a challenge. So what do you do? Are you doing that on your own? Is it death by Excel or using partners? What's your advice on tracking this and making sure you're you're complying with the NIST guidelines?
Absolutely. Honestly, when I came to St. Joseph's, Excel spread, I can't tell you how many Excel spreadsheets that we use to track different, whether it's just the vulnerabilities and risks, or just where we are in a program, and kind of red, green, yellow method. But nowadays, you can't rely on that. There's too much. Any given organization has hundreds or thousands of pieces of equipment that are vulnerable, and you have to track and upgrade or do things to them to ensure your compliance. So really, you need a software. And for St. Joseph's, we sought to acquire a Comply Assistant. They help us really put everything in one single location. It gives us a dashboard that allows us to import, whether it's our personal assessments, going through the tool and doing our assessments, or if it's a third-party assessment that we have outsourced, and we take that finding and we ingest it into the system, and we align it with NIST. And so we compare what we have, what we found, to NIST. We get an output, and then we put recommendations. And the quality, the good thing about this is we can assign individuals to it and track progress and ensure that we're consistently moving forward. I think when you do the Excel method or the list method, or any other method outside of using a software, you lose track. You lose sight of what really your risks are. And the output of this is a true risk level, right? Your organization, based on your compliance to the NIST standard or NIST framework, you come out of the outside of that with a percentage of how compliant you are. And of course, you could always improve. Even if you're 100% compliant, you're still, you're at the middle mark. We talked about levels.
That's interesting.
You could still improve upon that. And I think that's the goal that most organizations should strive for, instead of just being compliant and complacent right in the middle, is really improving and making their metrics that you can monitor and manage those, all of those findings in this framework.
I love that there's just a framework of where do I start, because there's so many things you could do, right? So I think it's interesting you're using Comply Assistant to kind of track that. Do you also use that to kind of go to your executive leadership to help them understand about the progress you made? Or, how do you do that? Getting buy-in from executive leadership is always a challenge with security.
Yes, it is. So I think going to executive leadership with very high technical data, or very risk-based assessment from either yourself or a third party, they really, obviously there's things that work well for an executive level, where if you're a technical person or in cybersecurity, you obviously need the metrics and the numbers and the specifics. But presenting something like where you are in compliance with either HIPAA or NIST, for example, a tool gives you the ability to do graphs and bar graphs and percentages, and really even color code it to the point where each area within NIST framework, whether it's recover, identity, protect, detect, or respond, that you could really zero in on where you need help and what products as an output from that assessment that you should be looking at. And that really drives the overall strategy for that team, right? So cybersecurity then looks at where you are, what your assessment, what it found. For example, maybe your third-party assessment is not up to date or up to speed or snuff, and you really need to focus on that. So then you start looking out, like, what do I need to be able to facilitate this? Whether it's people, whether it's a product, whether it's just timing, whether it's aligning with the business, building relationships, ensuring that you're in place in the legal team, ensuring that before purchases and acquisition happen, that you're top center of mind to them to make sure security is in the room. But that's really how I use the data that comes out of these tools.
That's great. So I find it interesting that you're both the infrastructure and security. I think that's pretty unique. I haven't seen that from a lot of people. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like, is cloud or on-premise more secure? And maybe more importantly, like, how are they different from a security perspective?
Yeah, it's a good question that you have there, and it's almost semi-loaded, because all of it has the ability to be vulnerable and not
Yeah.
secure.
Everything's
Um,
insecure potentially.
yeah,
Yeah, that's a good
everything
point.
is. So on an on-premise versus a cloud environment, on-premise, you have the controls over what you have in your place, in your environment. And whether that's all brand new environments, all up-to-date softwares and operating systems, it's really under your control. You accept the risk. You alone and your team know what needs to be done as far as what needs to be upgraded, what's legacy, what do you have to put more security controls around. Where if you were a cloud, looking at the cloud, it does offer security. It does offer a lot of capabilities. But what you lack is insight into what they're doing on their end.
Mm.
What controls they have, what are the ongoing processes that they do, and then changes to their software. Sometimes cloud providers, they send you changes, you know, via a notice, and it's out of sight, out of mind sometimes, where if you miss a very critical update, or you miss a setting, or you miss a configuration, you could essentially have a more insecure area by migrating to the cloud. I think the biggest factor that I tell everyone is, before you adopt cloud forward, is really train and develop your team that's going to be managing that. Because
Mm.
what I found is, when you do transition and move workloads to the cloud, you have to do it in a secure way. And obviously, just jumping in there for the first time, setting things, it's almost guessing at that point. And they make it easy, but I think that's the other area that I would be concerned about in a cloud instance. And then when we talk about cloud, there's these big cloud providers, obviously, that offer solutions for your environments to be able to transition to them, and you manage them in their cloud. But then there's cloud. When I think of cloud, I also consider SaaS solutions, that they're hosting
Mm.
your product in their environment, in
Yeah.
their data centers. It might not be one of the big three. It's just an infrastructure offering that they offer, and that's again an even more concerning avenue. And you see this in the news now. These vendors, security vendors, or supply chain vendors that are being impacted by security issues, directly affecting healthcare. But again, consider them as cloud. Consider them as third-party hosted. You don't know what's going on. You don't know what their controls are. You don't know what has happened. And sometimes, we feel the brunt of it in healthcare. And then you have to do one of two things. You have to really accept it, reassess them, understand what happened. I would say most organizations that do go through an issue have the most robust security program thereafter.
That's true.
So sometimes I say, hey, give them a chance. They could come out of this, and become even better than your next consideration, or other third parties or fourth parties. And like I just mentioned, fourth parties is another area of concern. These hosting providers, who are they having contracted to work for them, or in their environment, or connected to their environment? Because that's just another level of complexity that you have to be concerned about when you're going to think about cloud.
How do you address those fourth level? Is it just really asking the right questions to your partners, or how do you do it?
I think the most important time to ask those questions is before you sign a contract.
Yeah,
That's really how you catch them, and how the product is being utilized, how the workflow, how the data flow. I think leaders really need to be at the table, understanding how it works before they execute on the contract. A couple times in my life, I've had the opportunity to be handed a project that was already purchased, and then you look at it and you say, "Wow, this is not secure." Now we have to go back and to the drawing board with the vendor and try to figure out how to do this in a secure method or fashion. I think that's one of the most important things to look at.
Yeah, security's got to be part of procurement for sure. So, it's interesting. The world of technology is changing. Like this is something we talk a lot about at Healthcare IT Today. You even mentioned it, right? About how quickly everything's evolving. So what do you do to kind of stay ahead of others in your work and to make sure you're on top of all these changes?
I don't sleep. Um,
Sleep is for the weak. You can sleep when you die. What's your car?
um, so that's a joke, but in honesty, I think if you know where you are and as far as your program or your technology capabilities, it's really a baseline or a foundation of where you are in the world of technology and cybersecurity, and you know um, that you need to be somewhere in the future more advanced, more capable, more compliant, less risk, and you need to strive for that destination. And I think for me, it's really absorbing, listening to as many podcasts on security or technology or healthcare, IT, or really focus on what others are doing. I'm a big advocate for not reinventing the wheel. If there's been huge successes elsewhere, odds are if you start looking down that path, you may assume those risks or assume those successes as well. Aligning with very big partners that are successful in the industry. So best of breed for some circumstances, like in cybersecurity, there's best of breed organizations and software that healthcare nowadays should be looking towards and adopting. And those cover all different types of solutions, whether it's identity management or a governance product or endpoint detection or encryption or email protection, you name it. But you should be looking at these products and making sure, one, they align and they all work together, right? Because there's no reason to have something on an island that doesn't really help its other partners. Making sure all these product suites work together, share the data, and then really grow that program from that point forward. But what I do is I typically look at all the trends that are coming down the Gartner trend, the hype curve, look at the product suites that are aligned with that and coming down those pipes as well, and do my own assessment. Does that fit into my program? Does that match what my next step in my roadmap looks like? And if it is, start looking at the product and all the competitors. At that point, you should have a good understanding of who the top two are, who the middle two are, who the bottom two are. And with that information, then start bringing in the vendors for conversations of how it works, what's the cost of them. And then again, go back and do your business assessment on, can we afford it? Do we have to plan for it in the future? Is it something we need emergently because of something in the industry? For example, COVID really drove healthcare to really start securing a lot of their endpoints in a different way, and healthcare found money to do it. It was just a necessity at that point because you couldn't survive a sustained an outage or an issue. So using current events and then using the data and insight that you've already looked at to then start picking vendors and bringing them in. But at the end of the day, you always have to be learning in this environment. Healthcare doesn't change. Healthcare on the medical side and clinical side, you always have to be cutting edge and learning the new procedures. Same thing in technology. You really need to know the new technologies that are coming down the pipe, because that'll actually help you in the end, from a healthcare perspective, treat your patients and care for patients.
Yeah. Well, and you make such a good point. I haven't met a single security person that wasn't willing to share, like security is a team sport. It's not something I'm keeping this close to the vest, right? Everyone wants healthcare to remain secure. So that's great. Well, as we wrap up, we always like to end with some career advice or experience and ideas. So what's the best piece of advice that you've been given in your career?
For me, it's really constantly go out there and learn, absorb from others, find mentors in the industry. In technology or cybersecurity, there is a wealth of information out there that if you align with the right people and share data and share information, you pick up things in the industry. You can always bounce ideas off of your pals in the industry, and how that helps you kind of build your program. Through my career, I've had the luxury of having many mentors and people that I've absorbed information of, whether it's even to the smallest thing of just how to conduct myself in a meeting better, or how to absorb or be an active listener, or how to document things or write up RFPs, or along the way, you just collect this little bit of information. I think that's the most valuable thing, is everyone has a little piece of information or a little attribute that you can attain and kind of gather from that and experience and include it into your own self and move forward. And hopefully more mentors come my way and I continue to expand and grow, in addition to, education and going to get certifications, and formal education always helps align your thought process and the way you really need to think about business. So all of those things combined, I think just make sure in the future you pick up a book or research something on the internet and continue to expand your knowledge of healthcare and IT.
I love it. Be a sponge. You can always learn more. I love it. Thanks so much, Jesse. I appreciate you being part of the podcast, and I appreciate everyone for watching and listening. If you want to find the rest of the episodes in the CIO podcast, be sure to check it out at healthcareittoday.com or search for the CIO podcast by healthcareittoday.com on your favorite podcasting application. Thanks so much, Jesse.
Thanks, John.